I let my son and daughter-in-law stay in my home after they lost theirs. One morning, I woke up to find my bedroom completely emptied. My daughter-in-law smirked and said, "You've been moved to the basement, old man." My son said, "It's more efficient this way." That night, I sat alone among boxes, but the next day I walked into the bank and signed something that would. I didn't argue when they took my bedroom. That's the part people always get stuck on when I tell this story. They expect shouting, some big moment where I put my foot down, but there wasn't one. I just stood there in the doorway, staring at the empty space where my bed used to be, my dresser gone, the walls bare except for the lighter patch where my late wife's photo had hung for years. Everything was gone, not messy, clean, intentional. Like I'd never lived there. My daughter-in-law, Rachel, leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed. She had this small, tight smile on her face, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. "You've been moved to the basement," she said. Not asked, said. My son Daniel didn't even look at me. He was inside the room. Setting down one of their suitcases like this was just another step in some plan they'd already agreed on. "It's more efficient this way," he added, almost casually, like we were talking about rearranging furniture, not uprooting me from my own room in my own house. Efficient. I remember gripping the doorframe because I suddenly felt off balance. Not physically, something deeper, like the ground had shifted under me and I hadn't noticed until it was too late. "That's my room," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Rachel tilted her head. "It was your room. We need the space upstairs. The baby's coming, remember?" The baby. That word was supposed to make everything make sense. Supposed to make me step aside, smile, accept whatever they decided. Daniel finally looked at me then, but not really at me. Maury's like through me. "Dad, the basement's finished. It's not like we're putting you in storage," he said. "This just makes more sense for everyone." For everyone. I nodded, I don't even know why. Habit maybe, or shock. I just nodded like this was reasonable, like I hadn't paid off this house 15 years ago, like I hadn't invited them in after they lost theirs, like I hadn't told them, "Stay as long as you need." I didn't say another word. I walked downstairs. They had already set it up, that's what got to me. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. My bed was down there, shoved against the wall, boxes stacked around it, not unpacked, just dumped. My clothes still folded in bins, my books crammed into cardboard like they didn't matter. Like I didn't. There was a single lamp on, casting this dim yellow light that made everything feel smaller than it was. Temporary. Disposable. I sat on the edge of the bed and just listened. Upstairs, I could hear them moving around, drawers opening, footsteps, Rachel laughing softly at something Daniel said, the normal sounds of people settling into a space that felt like theirs. Because to them, it was. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat there in that basement, surrounded by pieces of my life packed away like I'd already died, and I kept thinking about one thing. The house. Not the memories, not the years, the house itself. Because there was something they didn't understand. Something I had never told them. I wasn't just living there. I still owned every inch of it. And the next morning I got up, put on my jacket, and drove straight to the bank. I didn't hesitate when I signed the paperwork. Because by the time I was done, that house wasn't going to feel so efficient anymore. The bank smelled the same as it had 10 years ago. Antiseptic, coffee, the faint undertone of stress and urgency that comes with money changing hands. I walked in like I had a purpose because I did, and I wasn't leaving without it. See, Daniel and Rachel didn't just take my room, they'd been slowly chipping away at my life for months. It started small, borrowing things, leaving lights on, taking over chores I normally handled. I chalked it up to helping them adjust after losing their apartment in Chicago. I told myself I was being generous. I told myself I was being a good father. But generosity has limits. There was the time I found my favorite jacket tossed into the laundry with bleach spots all over it. There was the time I woke up to find the kitchen rearranged, my cookware gone, my coffee machine replaced with some cheap single-serve model. That's when I started noticing the pattern. It wasn't just carelessness, it was a takeover. Little by little, corner by corner, they were erasing me from my own house. I should have seen the red flags earlier. I should have realized when Daniel offered to handle the finances for me after my knee surgery. When Rachel started planting ideas about remodeling for the family in my head. It all seemed innocent at first, like they were just trying to help. But help wasn't what they wanted control. And eventually they wanted my life. The basement move, that was the culmination. The message was clear: you're here to serve us, you're disposable. I sat there in that dim, box-strewn room and thought about my wife who had died 7 years ago. She had warned me about people like this. She had told me not to trust Daniel's judgment blindly, not to let him assume things just because he was my son. I'd brushed it off at the time. I didn't think my own child could be so cold. But here we were. At the bank, I didn't even hesitate. The lawyer had spread the documents on the desk, looking at me like I was signing away something dangerous. "Are you sure you want to proceed?" she asked. I nodded. My hands didn't shake. I didn't need to hesitate. This wasn't about revenge yet, not really. This was about reclaiming what was mine, about asserting the one thing in this house that still carried my name, my authority. The papers transferred the mortgage fully under my control. Daniel's name, Rachel's name, gone. Every financial lever, every access point, every room up to that point they thought they owned, now legally belonged to me. I signed the final document and handed it back, my thumb brushing over the ink like it was armor. Driving home, I could feel the shift in the air. Not a literal shift, they didn't know yet, but a psychic one. The house was mine. It had always been mine. And soon they were going to realize that. Pulling into the driveway, I paused. From the car, I could see them through the windows, bustling around like they were still in command. I almost smiled. Almost. Because they had no idea how fast this was about to change. I opened the front door, walked into the kitchen, and didn't announce myself. I didn't ask permission. I just moved through the house, letting my presence be known in small, quiet ways. A plate in the cupboard placed just so. A chair slightly adjusted. The smell of my coffee brewing downstairs, creeping up to where they were. It was subtle, but I could see the tension in the way Rachel froze when she noticed the scent, or the way Daniel hesitated, like he sensed a disturbance in the pattern of their control. They didn't realize it yet, but I wasn't just back in the house. I was preparing. I was planning. And what I had planned would make them wish they'd left me in that basement forever. I didn't announce it, not yet. I didn't need to. The first step was observation. I spent that first week moving quietly through the house like a ghost. Every morning I'd wake up in the basement, go upstairs while they were asleep, and start noting the little things. Who opened which drawer first, how they handled money, what habits they had that left doors unlocked, cabinets exposed, little vulnerabilities in their sense of ownership. I found a pattern almost immediately. Daniel and Rachel were meticulous, yes, but overconfident. They thought because they'd shoved me down a floor, taken my bedroom, and run the house on their terms, they were untouchable. That arrogance became my weapon. By the third day, I started small experiments. A missing document here, a light bulb slightly unscrewed there. Nothing they'd notice immediately, but enough to make them question themselves. They began to second guess. Was it their imagination? Did one of them misplace things? I didn't interfere, I just let the uncertainty grow. By week's end, Daniel was snapping at Rachel over trivial things, and Rachel's smirk had disappeared from my basement's doorway when she thought I wasn't looking. I was patient. Patience is underestimated. They'd always been impulsive, assuming instant gratification, moving fast because they wanted the house their way. I moved slower. I controlled the tempo. Then I made my first real move. I called the utility company and arranged for a routine inspection of the wiring in the basement. They arrived at 9:00 a.m. sharp. Before Daniel or Rachel were awake, and spent hours going through the fuse box, checking circuits, the works. Nothing dangerous, nothing that would actually harm anyone. But when Daniel came downstairs that afternoon, fuming that the electrician had interrupted his morning routine, I smiled, calm as ever, and said, "They're just making sure the basement's safe, for all of us." The seed was planted. Daniel bristled, Rachel whispered at him behind closed doors, and I watched as tension became palpable. They thought I was playing along, still the compliant old man, but I was setting the pieces. Next, I focused on my communications. I knew they were used to me being invisible in the household hierarchy, emails ignored, phone calls unreturned, but I started sending careful messages to the bank, to the insurance company, to city zoning, all phrased like routine check-ins. Every single one of them strategically included my name prominently. I was reclaiming authority quietly, making sure the house's official record reflected my presence, my control, my ultimate say. By the end of the week, their tiny empire of control was already cracking, unnoticed by them, but obvious to me. Every casual smirk, every efficient comment was starting to fade, replaced with hesitation and tension. And then I did the thing that would make them truly panic. I discovered that their temporary stay was anything but they'd been making major changes. New locks, additional furniture, even talking about converting my attic into a nursery suite. They assumed nothing could stop them. I waited until Rachel left for her yoga class, Daniel was at work, and I quietly accessed their online accounts, nothing illegal, just administrative. I reversed minor settings, removed new lock codes, paused furniture deliveries, cancelled the permit application for the attic renovation. I left it looking like a simple bureaucratic hiccup. When they came home that evening, Rachel's face went pale, Daniel's jaw clenched, and I stood at the top of the basement stairs, calm, sipping my coffee. "Everything okay?" I asked. They didn't answer. They couldn't, because they were starting to realize that I hadn't just been passive. I had been watching, calculating, preparing, and now the first wave of my control had quietly landed. That night I lay in the basement, surrounded by the echo of my life boxed up, and smiled for the first time since they had moved in. Because this was only the beginning. And I had the perfect plan for the moment when their arrogance would make the first real mistake. It happened faster than I expected. I came home from running errands that Tuesday, thinking I'd catch them off guard with another subtle adjustment to their new order upstairs. The house was quiet, too quiet. My chest tightened instantly. I walked into the living room and froze. The entire space had changed. Furniture shifted, boxes half unpacked. Yes, but that wasn't what struck me. It was the smell. Smoke. Faint, chemical. Someone had been here. Someone had tampered with the electrical outlets. Then I saw it, my safe, smashed, open, emptied. The cash, the documents, the heirlooms, the papers proving ownership of my home, gone. My hands shook. Rage started to rise, but beneath it, a cold, sharp clarity took over. I followed the trail upstairs and stopped in the hallway. There they were, Daniel and Rachel, standing in my former bedroom, holding my things like trophies. But it wasn't just the room. It was the way Rachel looked at me, smug, triumphant, and Daniel, he didn't even flinch. He wasn't embarrassed. He was proud. "We needed to make space for the baby," Rachel said. Her voice was deceptively calm. "You understand, right? Can't have the old man slowing us down." Daniel added, "We were planning this anyway, just got there first." That's when the first punch hit, not physical, but the gut-wrenching, icy realization. They hadn't just been taking my room, my space, my life. They'd been planning to take my house. They knew about the bank documents, they knew about the basement move, and they thought they could outsmart me by stealing my legal proof. Every calculation I had made, they'd accounted for it. They'd been 3 steps ahead. I stared at them, my mind spinning, adrenaline roaring. And then it hit me. They weren't just entitled. They weren't just opportunistic. They were dangerous. "You, what the hell are you doing?" I said, my voice shaking but controlled. Rachel smirked, tilting her head. "We're just making things efficient," she said. The same line, that smug, poison-laced tone. Daniel stepped closer. "Efficient for everyone," he said. I realized then that I couldn't just play subtle games anymore. My usual patience, my quiet manipulations, none of that would work. They had crossed a line. They weren't testing me. They weren't moving pieces in a game. They were trying to erase me. I backed out of the room slowly, keeping my eyes on them. Calm, watching, planning, because now I had something new, certainty. I knew exactly how ruthless they were. I knew they would try anything to push me out completely. And I knew without a doubt that I had to escalate. That night I didn't sleep. I walked the basement floor, touching the boxes, feeling the emptiness, imagining the chaos upstairs if I struck correctly. If I played my next moves carefully, I could not just reclaim my house, I could trap them inside their own arrogance. By 2:00 a.m., I had the outline in my head. Legal leverage, physical control, subtle sabotage. Every weak point I'd catalogued in their routines, their assumptions, their overconfidence. I would exploit every single one. And then the final, terrifying realization hit me. They weren't just trying to take my house. They were trying to erase me from my life entirely. Every memory, every corner of the home, every mark I'd left, all of it was theirs now. They thought they could rewrite history. I clenched my fists. A slow, deliberate fury settled over me. And I promised myself, if they thought they could get away with that, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Because the next move wouldn't just reclaim what was mine, it would make them wish they'd never crossed me. I spent the next 2 days in the basement, surrounded by the boxes of my own life. Only now they weren't just objects, they were tools, leverage, proof. I catalogued everything. Every heirloom, every document, every financial statement I could still access. I traced transactions, checked accounts, verified legal ownership down to the smallest detail. They had thought taking my safe would cripple me. They'd assumed I'd be left scrambling, desperate, powerless. They didn't realize I had backups, copies, digital archives, all tied to accounts they couldn't touch. They had underestimated the depth of my planning, the patience I had honed over years of being careful, being meticulous. By midweek, I had a full retaliation blueprint. Step 1, destabilize their sense of security. Subtle, psychological. I started small, moving personal items just slightly from where they thought they were, leaving doors open when they were supposed to be locked, rerouting deliveries so packages disappeared. Little things that chipped away at their perception of control. Step 2. Assert my authority legally. I made calls to the bank, the city zoning office, and even the insurance company, all under my name. Each conversation was deliberate, carefully phrased to create a paper trail showing that I still had full ownership and oversight. By the end of the week, any official action they might try to take in their favor would automatically trigger red flags. Step 3. Emotional leverage. This was the most delicate. I needed them to feel the fear and uncertainty I had felt when they moved me to the basement. I watched the routines meticulously, what time they woke, what paths they took through the house, how they communicated with each other, and I began to quietly manipulate those patterns. Texts I sent subtly contradicted things Daniel told Rachel. Lights left on or off, doors opened or closed in unpredictable ways. By day 4, their arguments started escalating over trivial issues, arguments that had never existed before. They thought they were in control, they were just feeding into my design. Step 4. Escalation readiness. I prepared for the moment they made a bigger misstep, like the one that had landed them in my former bedroom. I positioned cameras in areas where I could monitor any critical movement, not to spy, but to gather evidence if things spiraled out of control. Every document, every action they took that could threaten me, I would have on record. This wasn't paranoia, it was strategy. Step 5. Timing. Patience had to be perfect. I didn't want to act until their overconfidence peaked, until they fully believed the house was theirs, until they became reckless. That moment would be brief. And I had to strike precisely when it arrived. Too early and they'd suspect. Too late and they could cause real damage. By Sunday I was ready. I had the legal leverage, the psychological upper hand, the monitoring in place, and the plan to escalate if they resisted. All I needed now was the trigger, their arrogance, their greed, their impatience. I could see it forming even then. Rachel had started talking openly about renovations again, Daniel about selling parts of the property. They were beginning to assume control, making promises they couldn't legally keep, planning steps I had already nullified through paperwork. Every boast, every smirk, every efficient comment, they were walking right into the trap I had set. That night I lay in the basement, listening to their footsteps above me, their laughter, their planning, the audacity of it, and I felt a cold satisfaction. The house was mine in every official sense, but more importantly, the momentum was finally shifting. They didn't know it yet, but the walls that had boxed me in would soon be the walls that boxed them in instead. And when that happened, there would be no coming back. It hit me on a Thursday. I was reviewing the accounts one last time when my phone buzzed, a message from the bank. Nothing alarming in tone, just a confirmation of recent activity, but something in the wording caught my eye, a reference number that didn't match any of my actions. My stomach sank. I dug deeper. What I found made my blood run cold. Daniel and Rachel had tried to move again. Not just petty theft or minor manipulation this time. They'd attempted to transfer the title of the house into a joint account under their names, hoping to make it look like I had agreed. The digital trail was messy, but it was there. And the kicker, they hadn't even realized that in doing so, they'd left their IP addresses logged and traceable, including exact times, devices, and locations. Every move they made in the attempt was recorded. They thought they were slick. They thought they could outsmart me. But in one sloppy, overconfident moment, they had handed me the ultimate weapon. I called the lawyer immediately and laid out everything. They tried to transfer my property without my consent. They left a full digital footprint. I need action now. She was stunned, but efficient. Within hours, the bank froze the attempted transfers and confirmed that the house remained fully under my name. Daniel and Rachel had legally overplayed their hand. That evening, I returned home with a new plan, public exposure. But it wasn't going to be embarrassing or petty. It had to be surgical, devastating, and irreversible. I drafted letters to the mortgage company, the city, and even Daniel's employer, framing the situation in terms of fraud and attempted misappropriation of property. Everything factual, everything provable. I didn't exaggerate, I didn't need to. The evidence would speak for itself. I knew the moment I hit send, everything would change. Daniel and Rachel had been cocky, thinking the house and me were theirs to manipulate. But this would strip away their assumptions, their confidence, and their sense of security in one calculated strike. But then, as I reviewed the final drafts, my phone rang, an unknown number. I answered. The voice on the line was cold, familiar, and immediately recognizable. It was my daughter-in-law, Rachel. "Do you really think you're going to get away with this?" she said, calm, measured, but there was something in her tone that made me pause, almost like respect, and then the bombshell. "Daniel isn't who you think he is. None of this is about the house. He's been planning something bigger, something you wouldn't survive if you weren't careful." My mind raced. I had thought I knew every angle, every vulnerability, every arrogance they could exploit. But this was a level I hadn't anticipated. Daniel had been quietly cultivating allies, resources, and plans outside this house. It wasn't just about control, it was about power, real power, and now Rachel was warning me. It was a twist I didn't see coming. My son wasn't just manipulative, he was dangerous on an entirely different scale. I hung up, I sat in the basement, heart hammering, staring at the boxes, the evidence, the control I thought I had. I realized that the stakes had just doubled. The house was still mine, the legal leverage still strong, but now Daniel's ambitions extended beyond these walls. And suddenly, my carefully laid plans weren't enough. I had to adapt. I had to escalate faster, smarter, more ruthlessly than I ever imagined. I had underestimated him, and underestimating him had nearly cost me everything. But I wasn't about to make that mistake again. This wasn't just about reclaiming a room or a house anymore. This was about survival and revenge. I finally understood why Daniel and Rachel had done what they did, and the truth hit harder than any betrayal I'd ever felt. It wasn't just greed, it wasn't just arrogance, it was personal, deeply, terrifyingly personal. A week after Rachel's cryptic warning, I found it, an old letter, hidden in the pile of documents they'd left carelessly exposed in my office. It wasn't addressed to me, not exactly, but it was meant for me. Written by Daniel years ago, before Rachel ever came into the picture. It detailed a resentment that had been festering since he was a teenager. He felt I'd always favored him less than his younger sister, less than other cousins, even less than friends of mine who had made it in life. He blamed me for every failure, every perceived slight, every argument that had ever happened in our family. In his mind, I had built my life, my home, my legacy around myself while leaving him behind. And that resentment had grown slowly until it became something almost unrecognizable. A need not just to hurt me, but to erase me, to make me powerless, to force me into a corner and watch me diminish. That basement move, the theft, the smirks, it was all an opening gambit, a rehearsal for the endgame he had in mind. And Rachel, she wasn't just complicit. She was the architect, the one who had guided him, fueled the plan, sharpened the edges. The baby, the supposed necessity for efficiency, it was a cover story, a distraction to mask what they truly wanted, control, dominance, and the thrill of seeing me displaced. I sat in the basement that night, holding the letter, feeling a mix of fury and clarity. It explained everything, the subtle digs, the efficiency lines, the way they tested me, eroded my space, and assumed my patience meant weakness. They weren't naive or careless, they were calculated. Every move I'd thought I'd predicted, every subtle sabotage I'd planned, they had anticipated it all, or so they thought. That clarity changed everything. This wasn't a game about reclaiming furniture or asserting authority. This was about stopping a son from consuming the life of his father to satisfy a decades-old grudge. It was about survival, and it was about justice. I realized that subtlety alone wasn't enough anymore. I needed to hit harder, hit precisely, and hit where it hurt most, their sense of certainty, their assumed invulnerability. I had the leverage now, but it had to be executed flawlessly. Any misstep, any hesitation, and I would be the one losing more than a room. I could lose everything. But I had one thing on my side, the element of surprise. I had spent weeks building patience, observing, setting traps. And now I knew exactly why I had to strike, not just for revenge, but to protect what was mine from a man who had believed he could destroy me for reasons that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with resentment. The house wasn't just property anymore, it was the arena. The basement was no longer a cage, it was my war room. Every step I had taken had led to this, a final confrontation where truth, leverage, and ruthlessness would collide. And I promised myself one thing that night. When they realized what I knew, when they realized I had uncovered the motive, the deception, and the full extent of their plan, there would be no going back. They would finally understand that the battle wasn't theirs to win. Because what I was about to do wasn't just about reclaiming my home. It was about showing them the consequences of underestimating the man they had tried to erase. And they were about to see just how far I was willing to go. The day I struck, I didn't waste a second. I had spent weeks preparing every detail, the legal leverage, the psychological traps, the evidence, even the surveillance of their habits. Everything was aligned. Daniel and Rachel thought they were untouchable, that I was still the old man in the basement, harmless and predictable. They couldn't have been more wrong. I started early in the morning. The first move was simple but devastating. I changed the locks on every door, including the ones they assumed were theirs. The old key ring they had so casually used for weeks now opened nothing. Panic began almost immediately. I could hear Daniel banging on doors, Rachel yelling for him to calm down. Their control evaporated in an instant. Then came the legal hammer. I sent copies of all their attempted house transfers, the digital logs, and the documented harassment to Daniel's employer, the bank, and the city authorities. All of it was factual, undeniable, and damaging. Within hours, emails and phone calls came flooding into both of them. Daniel's position at work was questioned. Rachel's social credibility was being scrutinized. They thought they could move stealthily, but I had ensured every step of their scheme was documented. Next, the psychological blow. I didn't just confront them, I orchestrated it. I waited until Daniel stormed downstairs in frustration, and I met him at the bottom of the basement stairs. Calm, steady, unflinching. "Welcome to your new reality," I said, letting my eyes sweep the room, showing him the security cameras, the organized evidence of everything they had tried to do, the boxes of my belongings lined up like silent witnesses. His face went pale. Rachel tried to interject, but I ignored her, letting the tension suffocate the room. "This house belongs to me," I continued. "Every square inch, every legal, financial, and emotional right is mine. You tried to erase me, take what was mine, and manipulate me out of my life. That ends today." Daniel stammered. Rachel's smugness crumbled into panic. They were unprepared for the precision of my retaliation. They had counted on arrogance and inexperience. I had patience, planning, and proof. Finally, I delivered the coup de grace. I had set up an internal lockout system through smart home integration, something they had dismissed as trivial technology. Lights, doors, even climate control, completely under my command. The moment they tried to regain any semblance of normalcy, the house responded instantly. Power shifted, doors locked, security alarms triggered. Every attempt they made to assert control failed. They were trapped, not physically, but in every sense of their assumption of authority. And then I watched it happen. The confidence, the smirks, the efficiency lines, they all collapsed. They argued, flailed, and realized that their plan had completely backfired. The house that had once seemed theirs was now a fortress they could not breach. Every move, every smirk, every tiny act of defiance they had used to unsettle me was turned back on them. I finally sat down in my old chair, the one they had tried to erase me from, and I poured a cup of coffee. I watched them packing upstairs, futile, powerless, and I felt a cold, deep satisfaction. They had underestimated me. They had thought an old man in a basement could be ignored, overridden, erased, and now they understood the full cost of arrogance. Daniel and Rachel would never see me as harmless again. The house, the life, and the legacy, they had tried to take it all, and I had reclaimed it completely, strategically, and ruthlessly. Every calculated step had landed perfectly. By nightfall, the house was quiet. I sat in the dim light, alone but victorious. Every box in the basement, every document, every corner of my home testified to my patience, my cunning, and my resolve. They had learned the hard way that you do not erase me, and you do not take what is mine. And in that silence, I finally allowed myself a slow exhale. Justice was done, not by chance, not by force alone, but by the careful, deliberate, and devastating revenge I had meticulously orchestrated. They had crossed the line, and I had made sure they paid. The story ends with the son and daughter-in-law trapped in their own arrogance, the house restored to its rightful owner, and revenge executed with precision and permanence.